Some of you follow the Army, some of you don't, but if you missed the big AUSA event the other week, here's a little recap for all you BD types. So the Secretary hit on a couple things, and you can read the quote there, but the three different areas that she was talking about was weapon systems, force structure, and recruiting. And when you look at the weapon systems, there's a cheat sheet for you. There's a whole bunch of systems and capabilities that we're working on. Long-range precision fires, next-gen combat vehicle, future vertical lift, air missile defense, network, and soldier lethality. Some of you who have been following the Army are like, hey, Young, I thought the Army was doing this whole Army modernization effort with all your weapons platforms. Well, we are, but we've been actually doing things so quickly from an acquisition at speed perspective. We're not really focusing on the 30-odd plus capabilities we've already fielded. We're going to focus on those next 6. But just to recap a little bit here, the Army acquisition at speed is something that we like to talk about because there's a lot of perception that the acquisition community goes pretty slow. And if you look at some of the accomplishments that we've gone and made, when I joined the Army back in the late 80s, we had the big 5 programs that took us, more than 10 years to build and more than 20 years to field, right? But if you look at some of the things that we've been doing from an acquisition standpoint, we've got things out there like the next-gen squad weapon in 2 years after we've gotten the requirements. And with some of the other acquisition authorities that Congress has already given us, especially in light of the conflicts that are going on, we have something like the rapid acquisition authorities that we've used, that we've gotten the Coyote system 3 months after we've gotten the requirements. So Coyote, let's put that in context. In the Middle East, there's a lot of drones and a lot of threats that were going on with the Houthis, Hezbollah, all of that, right? And there was a lot of need for better protection for our soldiers. So the Coyotes is a counter-UAS system built, developed, and deployed in literally 3 months. And so that's what we're talking about, acquisition at speed. We've hyper accelerated everything that we're trying to do in the Army with the authorities that we already have. And we're also concentrating at production at scale. And if you think about that, we're using a lot of relationships with industry, because y'all are our partners, to get new prototypes, to get new capabilities developed and fielded. But the other thing that y'all probably heard in the news is about production at scale, because ammunition, 155 artillery rounds, right? Current pace in which they're being consumed in Europe, a lot more and a lot faster and a lot higher volume than people are accustomed to. So we're really looking at production at scale. So those are kind of the highlights. I did have a cool video that was going to cover that, but really in the interest of the cliff notes for all you BD types, that was kind of the nutshell of AUSA. But the message is the acquisition community is working with the Army enterprise to really get everything done quickly. And we're really hyper-focusing on production at scale, okay? Top of the deck, please. So today's topic is really about disruption and AI. There was earlier sessions that talked about how different capabilities are being integrated with current capabilities, whether it's workflow with artificial intelligence. There are things that are being done in theater right now, where the Army, with some of our colleagues and other services and the intel community, are actually integrating certain algorithms with certain workflows, right, with low-code, no-code capabilities that are out there. So it should be a really good topic for y'all. But one of the other things I wanted to hit on is how the Army is looking at artificial intelligence. And when you look at that, y'all might be like, if you're not covering the Army, y'all might be like, why a bunch of Army soldiers who jump out of planes really care about AI? And from our perspective, we have to be, because we're the largest consumers of AI, right? We don't have the big aircraft carriers. We don't have the huge jet fighters, right? Our resources are our soldiers. But our soldiers, we have a lot of volume of soldiers, and we're going to be the largest consumers of AI in the DoD. And so for us, we're going to take a leadership role here for the DoD We're not going to let another service figure it out and say, hey, Army, go take it the way we built it. We're really setting out the foundation so we can really set the path here for artificial intelligence. And so some of you might have heard a little bit about the 100-day plan that the Army and ASOL community actually developed for AI. I'll hit on a couple of those things. And then that was really setting the conditions for us to accelerate the adoption of artificial intelligence. An outcome of those are those 5 lines of efforts you see in green. But one of the things that I want to highlight is what we call #DefendAI. And so while the community is working on capabilities across the board for algorithms and artificial intelligence, what I'm trying to do is look at what are the obstacles that are going to be out there that are going to prevent us from adopting third-party generated algorithms at scale and at speed, right? And so that was the intent of why we came up with this #DefendAI. And it's really a notion of how do we actually look at third-party generated algorithms and look at the risk and make risk-based decisions on that algorithm and say, based on the risk, we can put it in a closed system. Based on this risk, we can put it in a business system. Based on these risks, we'll put it in a weapons system. But in those scenarios, clearly, we can accept less risk, right? Especially if it's safety critical or if it's airworthiness related type of systems, we don't have the latitude to take more risk in those things. But it's a framework so we can actually work with y'all to adopt the algorithms, right, at the different risk levels. And so the RFI actually closed last week, 2 weeks ago. And we actually got a lot of great responses from industry. And really, it was really a straw man. We identified probably about 30 different risks or attacks and had 60 different mitigations to start the discussions with industry saying, hey, are these good? Do you have any other insights? Do you have tools? Are there other gaps in here so we can work with you all so we can actually adopt algorithms and look at the risk? And so we got some really good feedback. We're going to refine that version, and you'll probably see another version of that. And then the other portion of that is that the DoD has been pretty vocal about saying we have a very specific approach around AI, around responsible AI, about humans being in the loop or on the loop. And so in accordance with that, we're actually the only framework that we put out there. We've looked at NIST, we've looked at MITRE, we've looked at Amazon's and Google's, we've looked at Databricks, lots of other organizations that are looking at that strictly from a runtime perspective. And yes, we're going to do all that, but because responsible AI is a focus for us and we have to have human in the loop, we added another whole dimension around human controls and human dimensions and human biases and those type of things. So again, I think that was actually some good inputs to augment those components, and that's what we were trying to do with industry. So that was the 100-day plan. The 500-day plan I want to talk a little bit about. One of the things that we want to do in the 500-day plan, so the 100-day plan set the conditions, right? The 500-day plan is operationalizing all these different type of things. And then if you all do the math, in FY26, which is actually calendar year 25, in FY26, we actually are the first service that have actually programmed money with Congress in the POM for a program of record for artificial intelligence to build out the infrastructure and a secure environment and trusted environment. And so if you do the math, in about 500 days, we'll actually have that money from Congress. And so the 500 days are about how do we get an early head start on those things. And so we've actually taken a little bit different approach where industry's like, hey, we can't wait another year and a half about the funding. Let's start working together, and that's what we're doing. And so we've actually taken the program office and looked at the gaps that they already know that they have and published a series of X-Tech challenges or prize competitions. We're publishing a whole bunch of challenges as it relates to cyber, specifically in this space. And as technology comes and matures, or as vendors are working capabilities and maturing, or if you just have a good pitch, we'll fund those efforts to help you scale those and mature them. By the time that 500 days are over, you might have gone from a pitch, $10,000 to $25,000, to a SBIR phase 1 to mature a proof of concept from the pitch, 200, 500,000, right? And if actually from that it matures more, we'll fund a prototype for up to $5 million, right? All to get those ready to scale for when we actually get the full program of record and the full funding from Congress. We already have capabilities that are already going in there, right? So a little bit different approach than how the Army or DoD has typically done SBIRs before. We're actually identifying the program with the needs, so we kind of match it up, and we avoid this valley of death, at least from the AI perspective. The other portion on the 500-day plan that we're working on, hashtag calibrate AI, hashtag break AI, and hashtag counter AI. And so calibrate AI, if some of y'all have heard, we've partnered with the Army CIO, and Leo and I are pretty tight. Between us and ASALT and him, we cover the whole Army landscape. And so we've been teaming on a lot of guidance and memos. And this spring, we both signed out guidance around Gen AI and large language models, right? To encourage the Army enterprise, right? And our soldiers and our engineers and scientists and the community to really experiment with that. And what we've done is we've set up different enclaves at different levels, IL2, 4, 5, with different large language models so our community can actually experiment with industry on how to actually use things, do some discovery, but then more importantly, flesh out the use cases, right, that we're gonna actually need, but also doing that in a secure environment, meaning we have data at different enclaves, we're gonna ensure that those stay there, but we can also augment that with large language models in that secure environment with the data, right? So we can experiment at all the different levels, right? And that's where we're working with industry to do that. Calibrate AI is a specific one that we are focusing from an acquisition community about how do we actually use LLMs to really help contracting, to really help policy and language that actually our community can use to really accelerate some of the work and tedious, laborious work that's going on. The break AI is really about the same thing. These are kind of barriers that we're trying to break down. Break AI is really around testing and evaluation, and I don't mean performance testing or drift. It's really about how do we actually test artificial intelligence as we get closer to AGI. All right, so software is deterministic. It's easy to test. Algorithms are probabilistic. Okay, we kind of generally know, right, from a statistical standpoint, how we can test for that. As you get closer to AGI, you don't know what the behaviors or outcomes are going to be. So how do you test for that? I don't know. If y'all have some really big brains in your companies or organizations, come and talk to us about that. We're trying to really figure that out so we can actually work with y'all to adopt those algorithms faster. These are going to be the obstacles for the DoD to really adopt artificial intelligence at scale. So that's what we're trying to work on. Counter AI is really cool because everyone's looking at it from a how do we commercialize algorithms perspective. Great. Our enemies are already using and thinking about how do they use it against us. So we should be thinking about how do we give cover for our soldiers, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right, to counter the way that our threats are going to use it for us. So big areas that we're really trying to focus on, right? If we're not thinking about the offense and defense at the same time, right, we're going to be behind the power curve. So that's really the notion of the 500-day plan. The next slide here, a couple of these big accomplishments here. If you haven't been tracking the Army, there's a lot of things that you have to do to move left so we can adopt artificial intelligence, right? If you move left of that, it's really around data, right? And if you move left of that, it's about software. So if you have been following some of the news, right, we had the Secretary sign out the Modern Software Directive. So we can meet you all in the middle, we can get to Agile, and we can get to DevSecOps, and we've already broken down a lot of the obstacles in the Army that prevented us from doing modern software development like y'all, right? So the top bullet there, March 24th. That was signed by the Secretary. And some of you might be like, well, Young, you guys have been doing that for the last 2 years. And yes, we are, but we're trying to codify these so we have forward momentum regardless of what happens next week with the elections. So that in that way, industry can still do all the modern software development practices. Army's set up to do that, and we can continue going down that path. Decoupling the hardware and software is a really important one from a material release process, because we don't want to tie the software to the hardware refresh rate. And so the analogy I use is that if you have it coupled together, it's like, how often do you upgrade your phone? Probably every couple years. How often do you upgrade your car? Maybe 10 years. In the Army, we have a lot of exquisite hardware platforms, to include weapons platforms. If we tie our software release process to the same cycle of our hardware refreshes, 10 years for a car, I mean, we're still using the M1 Abrams 40 years ago. And so if we wanted to break that process so we could actually release software separate from the hardware releases or refreshes, so it could literally be like your Tesla, overnight, boom, you refresh the software, right? So we don't want to tie it together from that context. Digital engineering directive are really important. I can come back to that a little bit. But the Gen AI policy, I touched on it earlier. Leo and I pushed that so we can encourage people's experimentation. We set it up in the enclaves. But then we also added other things, like if the Army is using Gen AI, we want our people to watermark it, right? Kind of logical, right? The software bomb portions kind of builds on the software side. We just want to look at kind of our risk and vulnerabilities associated with software. And so I think actually we got a lot of feedback from industry that y'all now, you didn't before, but y'all now love the software bill of materials policy, because it's much better than the software attestation that the federal government's trying to push in, right? Because that has a lot of liability implications. So we're actually doing the software bomb policy. The data mesh and the UJA policy is critical, right? Because now that we've cleaned up how we do more software development to be more modern the way you all do it. The other portion is data. We got to get a better handle on our data. We spend more than 80% of our time just wrangling data. So if we want to accelerate artificial intelligence and AI development and training, we got to get a better handle on that. And a lot of times our data is trapped within our stovepipes siloed system. So the data mesh and the UJA policy, the policy actually is signed, is really about how do you unlock that data? How do you decentralize things? How do you actually tag it? How do you actually enable the CDO to drive their data policy and strategy, right? This is the technical implementation of that. And then that way, right, what's the statistic? Only about 5% of data, or any data, is actually useful for algorithm development and training, right? So that's why we're doing all these things, so we could get to AI adoption at scale, okay? There's a lot of other things here. The last one here, source code and artifact storage policy memo, we just signed last week. When I got to the Army, I was like, how does our partners deliver code to us? You'd be amazed at the answers I got. So I'm like, hey, it probably makes sense for us to have, get delivery of source code and have one location for that instead of all these different locations. If we actually do it, a lot of times you'd be amazed. We were getting some zip files. I'm like, really? So we're trying to do things to make things a little bit easier for the industry. And then the other things that are coming, the project linchpin policy, the data bomb, building on software bombs, we're going to do a data bomb for the same reason. We just need better line of sight of our risk posture for data, as well as that's going to be an ingredient for algorithms, right? And then, speaking of which, we have an AI summary card policy that we're working on as well, okay? This is pretty cool. This is what I wanted to talk about a little bit more of a teaser. I'm going to go through the next series of slides really quickly. When we first looked at this, before, actually, this is the current landscape. The intent of that is a little bit busy, and it's partially intentional because I realize you can't all see it. But the intent is to say there's a lot of white space here. If you look at that from a Trojan attack perspective on algorithms, right, or even a defense around Trojan attacks, a lot of white space. So when I looked at that, I was like, hey, we got to fill in these gaps. And so what we decided to do was develop a project that had a couple of these aims, but you can already kind of look at what that is, right? How do we get more resilient algorithms, right? And so part of that, we have to figure out some of the Trojan attacks so we can actually defend against it. You saw kind of the white spaces, right? And in the process of doing this project, and we're still working on it, we've actually done a lot here. And in the context of that, we actually see the blue bubbles and the red bubbles. Those are what we've already accomplished in this space, showing how we're trying to close some gaps from a white space perspective. And then you can see now that transformer models and LLMs have really taken off, we've actually extended that, and we've actually put another column in there around agents. Everyone's talking about agents. Okay, we're doing that too. And so that's our current state. Our future state are the other bubbles that we're working on, so we can actually get more resilient algorithms. And that way you can see we still have some white space, but it's a really good before and after picture, right? From an attack perspective and from a defense perspective, right? Everyone uses, or not everyone, a lot of people are experimenting with LLMs, which is great, and we encourage that. But I can sit up here, and I'm not as technical as probably some of your smart engineers here, but using chain of thought prompting, or prompting, right, that you do with large language models, I can do a Trojan attack on that through chain of thought prompting in 4 prompts for every single large language models that are out there. And so that's what we're saying. We want to encourage everyone experimenting with it, but we want to actually do it smartly, break down these obstacles, and work on resiliency so we can actually work with you in industry to really drive that. So with that, I think I'm at time. More hashtags. Army Digital Odyssey has been our journey to do digital transformation. And then my own personal tagline, disrupt the status quo. So with that, thank you very much.